Hey everybody, it's Thursday.
And welcome to this week's edition of The Night Bite.
I'm Josh.
And I'm Emily. And we are stuck inside today with rain. But I think that's kind of been the name of the game lately because we've had a lot of different weather patterns push through lately.
Yeah, it's been different, I think, around the Midwest for everybody. Some people are experiencing a bunch of rain. Some people experience no rain. Some people are experiencing hot. Some are cold. It's all over the place. For us, I think it's just been, it's been really ill-placed downpours that have been really killing us, right? So I know some people have been having a really good time fishing. For us, it's been a little bit more difficult, and I really think that has to do with the amount of rain hitting the bodies of water that we've been fishing. Our water temps are starting to come up, and then they get crashed down, and then they come back up, and then they crash down, and it's been a really tough cycle. And just like everybody else, we have our days where we get kicked in the teeth, and Emily and I were out last weekend, and we were fishing a different section of this lake that we haven't fished before, because I know that there's some big gills in there, and I just haven't, found them yet. So we were fishing, or we were out scouting a little bit. I found a really nice weed edge and, 8 feet of water. And I was like, oh man, we should just troll this a little bit while we're mapping. Plunk my jig in the back of the boat, like, what was it? Like 30 seconds. Had a nice fish on. I was like, oh, this is going to be nice. And kind of felt like a walleye. The jig popped out of its mouth because I really wasn't. It like caught me by surprise. So then I, plunked it back. 10 seconds, had another bite. Missed that one's short struck. 10 more seconds, had another bite. That was a little pike, bit me off, and I was like, man, this is going to be good. And then we spent the next 7 hours not catching anything. So we did find them. We couldn't replicate that bite. I don't know what happened. I got a little bit cocky and we tried doing for a little bit more, and that didn't happen. So we went and tried fishing some shallower water where we thought it would be a little bit warmer. And really, we fished this whole lake basically. And the whole lake was just one temperature. It was 60 degrees. And the fish there, we saw some fish. They were just like so shallow. And it's just hard to reach them especially now with the weeds that are up. So, it's just one of those things that you just gotta play it out.
Well, you're making some really great points, because one of the big factors this past weekend was that the water temperatures had gone up and are back down. So ever since this past weekend, we've had some warm temperatures. I don't know where they're going to be at, and I'm interested in seeing that. But like you were saying, where we left it is the water temperatures were all cohesive. So there weren't necessarily warm bays and this and that. Mm-hmm. And so the typical patterns that we look for aren't maybe what it is right now, and that is okay. But the other thing, I guess, that we always start talking about this time of the year is that you start seeing people fish memories. Mm-hmm. Where should I be? Where were the fish last year? And so it's not necessarily what you did last year or in the last few years. Look at that water temp. Look at where those fish are. Look at the weeds. Look at what those water bodies are doing, because that's really going to help guide you to where those fish are sitting.
Yeah, this is where we reiterate, using technology like your Google Maps, make sure you or your Google Pictures too, take a picture of your screen, of your locator, because that'll tell you water temperature. It gives you a date, and if you have your location on it, it'll give you a location where you took that picture. And so you can use stuff like Onyx Fish that has a whole bunch of information saving capabilities. Using that stuff this time of year to coordinate with those memories, I think, is really important.
But let us know, I guess, what your water temps are, if you know what they are, or otherwise, we're all looking forward to getting out this weekend. It might have changed since last weekend, right? But we love to see the different trends across the Midwest, because this is that time of the year where there's a lot of different stuff going on, depending on if you're north or south or whatever in between. So I know a lot of people are taking vacations and traveling here and there, and we'll try to connect you with as much information as possible. But with that, we have somebody on tonight that we are going to do a lot more talking about fishing. So let's get him on the show. Matthew, thank you so much for being here this evening.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. So I think we got to officially meet you at last year's Wisconsin Ice Fishing Expo. But for people who have not met you yet, can you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah, my name is Matthew Crawford. I'm currently in college at the University of Wisconsin La Crosse. I've been there for the last 3 years. I'm studying communication and media studies, and I'm trying to use that to help me take my social media platforms to the next level and hopefully end up in the TV industry one day. So, the big thing that I like to do with my platforms is, let me preface it with this. The way I was raised on fishing and the way that I've come to know fishing is that most guys who do really well out there, they don't like to share how they're doing it. They want to keep it kind of secretive and they want to, hide it so that way they can just keep hammering the fish and that they don't get a lot of people where they're fishing doing what they're doing. But for me, the big thing I've noticed with my platforms through Facebook and Instagram and YouTube is that the more I share, the more that helps people and the more that people want to come back and see what I'm up to. So it doesn't matter if I'm fishing for bluegill, smallmouth bass, northern pike, it doesn't matter. I'm always sharing where I'm at, usually the body of water, but more importantly, am I fishing weeds? Am I fishing rocks? Am I fishing out in a deep basin? Things like that that'll really help someone dial in that pattern, whether it's on the same lake. I don't mind if they come fish right next to me, or if it's on a different lake near them where it has, like you guys were saying in the intro, similar water temps, similar kind of structure. That way it's something that they can really take away from it and has value to them.
Okay, so I totally did not expect for this to be where the conversation starts. And I'm so excited because you are, I think,
Hey,
in a
James.
lot of ways so different than other people, but I think you're kind of hitting the nail on the head is that, sharing some of these, dare I say, secrets, right? So sometimes people go out on the water, they catch a fish on something, and that is their new secret bait, right? And that is cool, that is great, right? But not everything can be a secret. But there is kind of a delicate balance between, like, I guess, sacrificing your greatest fishing spot and, sharing information. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, so I think the thing it comes down to is the phrase I would say I've been repeating a lot in Facebook messages and comments lately is that, believe it or not, fish swim. So when it comes to the like spring runs of fish, don't get me wrong, if you tell somebody that you're doing really well, and let's say the white bass in the river, like yes, they stay there, big schools of them are in there in the hundreds to thousands of fish. They're in there for like a month. So that like totally lasts a long time. A lot of people will move in and hit that pretty hard. But when it comes to like, let's say I find a bunch of walleyes on the lake on a point that I really enjoy fishing because it's shallow points and that's just the kind of fishing I like doing with jigs. So if I find a pod of like 20-inch fish there, like for Lake Winnebago, those are pretty good sized fish, 20 something ish fish. If I find those, right, and I catch those and I post pictures of them, I am totally fine posting the exact, like, I'm fine sharing the background because those fish more than likely are not going to be there the next day. They might be, and somebody might stumble across them there again. But in my experience, it's more so that, you might find a pot of fish like that on a similar point again, like on maybe another shallow point on the lake, but it might not be the exact same point. So again, it's about kind of giving people information on what was there that brought the fish there and what kind of structure they're on or what kind of baits I caught them on so that they can replicate it. But it's not really effective for them to go and try and do it at the exact same spot unless it's during like a seasonal movement, like a spring run.
Well, and you're bringing up, a few interesting factors. Is let's say somebody is going to come and do exactly what you're doing, like at that moment. First of all, they have to be following you that closely, or like looking up, coming to your area. But then, have the same tackle, have a boat, have whatever these factors are to put all this together. And so, I mean, it is almost easier just to apply it to your own situation. And so, I mean, hopefully that's something that people are going to be able to learn to do.
Yeah, and I would say too on that note, someone is going to be like that focused in on what I'm doing that they want to follow me around and imitate what I'm doing. Because I will say I do have it, especially out here in Lake Winnebago, where like I've started to gain more of a local following here. I do have like people pretty much every time I'm out, like kind of not usually people don't get too close, but following pretty much every time I move. But again, like it's not necessarily helpful because I'm also a multi-species guy. So they never really know what I'm fishing for when I'm out there. Sure, I might have posted walleyes yesterday, but it doesn't mean I'm not going for bluegill now. So it's hard to say that it'll help them if they like if I'm just a walleye guy, sure, they can just count on me fishing for walleyes every day, but that's not what I do.
Well, and that is fun to be a multi-species angler, to be able to shift gears like that. And I think that's one of the things that makes it possible to share information, because when there is so much going on in the system, there's people out there that they have maybe just one spot or one bite that they rely on. Maybe that's the only place that they can get to. And so when there are options, that really, really helps as far as being a fisherman.
Right. And I'm definitely lucky to fish the systems that I do. I mean, between the Lake Winnebago system, I mean, even like Green Bay, it's not far from here. And then over at school on the Mississippi River, like two massive bodies of water. Now, if it's a tiny little lake up north, I might not share the exact lake name because, yes, if you send thousands of people that lake name, like the odds of a few people going up there and going to town on like panfish, for example, they're pretty high. But I like to keep it in perspective. Do I think I'm really having that much of an impact? Like, are that many people going to drop what they're doing and go there immediately? Probably not. Sure, a handful, but if they want to go out and catch fish that badly, props to them. I'm out there doing the same thing. Like, if I see somebody doing really well, I'm going to go try it for sure.
And how dare they learn something new?
Right, right. Yeah,
I
you'd be amazed the amount
yeah.
of hate messages and comments I get from people. I mean, I wouldn't say it's a lot. It's just more than I like would expect. Because there's a lot of people who, again, it's not a lot, it's just some. There's some people who get really upset by the fact that other people are learning where fish are. And I think maybe it's just because they've seen more people on their favorite spots. But I'm like, again, I don't mind if other people are catching fish, especially on a big body of water like this. There are thousands of fish out there. Like, if people are fishing within their legal limits, it doesn't bother me what you do one bit.
Well, and I think, to some extent, where the fish are, there are some of these popular fishing spots that, you drive by the highway, you drive by the road, you drive by whatever, and you can see these people out there. So some of these like secret fishing spots are, first of all, not secret at all. But I think, what we're doing is like helping people learn how to fish, because sometimes you see people go out there and they have like the weirdest setup and you never know what works. So I'm not judging it, right? But sometimes that's like lack of education or trying something new, or just like you don't even know, right? And so when you can connect that person with, a style of fishing or a jig or a rig or something that's going to apply to their situation, that is super cool to see those people out there catching fish.
Right. Exactly. I would say that's one of the most rewarding things for me so far is that I've had dads with their kids who maybe they only get to one weekend a month or something like that. I had one this last month who wanted to go out for panfish when I was hitting those pretty hard. And I mean, he's got a full-time job. He's not out there every day trying to figure out where the fish are. So he doesn't necessarily know what they're going to be. And he told me that because of my posts where I talked about moving a bit shallower for panfish, they weren't catching anything out in the typical like 4 to 6 foot around here is usually pretty good. They bumped up into like 2 to 3 feet of water and they started hammering bluegill. And then they got to go home with a nice meal for him and his kids. I'm like, that to me, like, you can't, it's priceless to me. I really love when I can like have some kind of impact just because again, I put out a post with a paragraph caption on there on how I caught fish. I love when that can help someone else go and do the same.
Yeah. So we started the show talking a little bit about how, there's weeds up, but the water temp is kind of all over the place. And I guess people heard all of that already, so I don't need to reiterate it. But are you finding similar patterns to start off this spring? We're not starting spring. We're pretty late in the spring at this
It's
point.
summer tomorrow.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I would say so. Let me begin by saying I do not have any sonar on my boat, so it's hard for me to say what water temp is. When I fish with other people, I usually can have like a rough idea. And in the other boats I've been in lately, I'd say it's been like high 60s to mid or to low 70s at the most, especially with this warm up coming this weekend in the 90s. I'm sure it's going to be mid 70s by the end of the weekend. But like you guys said in the intro, though, all the rain, like we've had a lot of rain too lately, and every time it rains, that water temp, it just plummets. And I have noticed too, like pre-front, one of my favorite times to fish right before a storm moves in. Fish are always going nuts before then. But yeah, some of the post-front fishing, it's been tough. Like there's usually something I can find to put together, but it's not necessarily where I think it'll be or what I think it'll be. Like the fish that I would have expected to be there pre-front maybe aren't there. And that's again, it's just with that changing weather, fish they change. I don't really have a good way to explain exactly why, but we all know it. If you fished in like post front conditions like that, the fish, they're either completely shut off or they just go nuts.
Well, and a lot of that, has to do with if people don't already know this, and I think I've brought it up before, 1 degree of water temp is like a 10-degree air temp change for us. So imagine going from 70-degree water to 60-degree water. That's 100 degrees change in a night.
If you
So
live in Wisconsin, you've seen it.
so not many of us would be active very much either if that was the case, for us. And I think, I just heard recently that the lake we were on last weekend, as soon as Tuesday, the water temps were back up towards mid 60s, upper 60s. And so I mean, we only missed it by a day or two, but that was that rain, right? And so you have to be mindful of that. And those post front, that just, not only are the fish active, but that's when you get a lot of insect hatches, and everything is just moving around before they hunker down for the storm. So I think that's some really good information.
Right. And I noticed Emily. Yep, go ahead.
No, that's it.
I noticed that Emily asked about the weed growth too, and that is one of the things that I probably would say I closely monitor throughout the spring, summer, fall, because I found that if you can find not necessarily like the super dense weeds, like where you'll see guys down south bass fishing in super heavy cover, like not that kind of weeds, but just kind of scattered clumps of weeds in where they're just starting to grow up. For me, that I would say has been the best if I'm fishing a little deeper. And then the shorelines lately, where the weeds are now just starting to grow up, those shorelines have been the best, rather than ones that have been chock full of weeds for months, and rather the ones that are like just plain rock. It's been the ones that have weeds starting on them.
Mm-hmm. And then I was going to ask if that was for panfish, but I got to say, I feel like at this time of the season, you might even still be finding walleyes mixed in.
Oh my gosh, I can't even. Yeah. So I was just out this morning fishing some moderately heavy weeds, and there were walleye loaded in there. And then shallow rocks too. Again, wherever there's some weeds coming up, there are walleyes. Now it hasn't been like much of a size game. Like it's all been your traditional eater walleyes over here. I don't know what the size limit is by you, but over here, I mean, there's no size limit with Lake Winnebago, but still I won't keep anything under 14, usually like 14 to 16, maybe 17. And lots of those up shallow, like pretty much anywhere you look on the shallow rocks. Like I said, those shorelines, especially any kind of like points that stick out too that are rocky. And then in the weeds too, the weeds just hold so much life. Like they hold insect life, they hold little fish. I caught 2 perch on a hair jig while I was walleye fishing this morning. So that's another reason for those walleye to be there. So it's just all sorts of life in those weeds. That's on this lake. I would say the weeds are what I focus on the most because I love casting. Personally, I don't love trolling much. But you guys mentioned at the fishing expo when I saw you about panfish trolling. That I'm very, very interested in doing that because right now
we're gonna fish the
yeah, we'll have you up when we'll show you a little bit more in detail. But yeah, and you mentioned casting and you mentioned hair jigs. I've really enjoyed watching your posts about that because that's one of those things that has become a popular jig setup in the last couple of years, and it's old, right? That hair jigs go back to the beginning of the 20th century. So it's like it's funny that how these things are cyclical, and it's really cool to see kids like you utilizing that old tech to bring it back and be successful with it. And you are teaching some old guys like, oh, hey, this is how you're fishing hair jigs. And I think that's so cool that I smile every time I read all the comments under your hair jig post because it's like you guys have, your whole life this stuff has been around for you guys and you guys have never used it. Now this kid is showing you up how to use it. So that's
right.
Awesome.
Well, I appreciate that, first of all. But secondly, yeah, I put out that hair jig video, the how-to, a couple days ago. It was only a 3-minute YouTube video, which like I know guys normally will throw out like 10, 20, 30-minute long YouTube videos. But I was just getting so many questions in my comments and messages about how the heck are you working that hair? You don't use minnows? Like you're just using a hair jig, no bait, no nothing? And they're like shocked, like you said. And I didn't really think this was that revolutionary, I guess. I kind of thought a lot of people were doing it. But then I just was like, okay, I can't really explain this through text. So the best way to explain is just throw together a video. And I went out and I had 3 walleyes in 30 minutes, which like for here, like it's pretty good. Like most guys out here are just trying to get their 3 walleyes and go home for dinner. So that was a good example of how I was using them. And like I said, during that video, I was able to show exactly how I was working the rod to make the jig move the way I wanted it, showing that I wasn't whipping it, to the next country, but I was just doing little pops off the bottom, and then keeping the line tight is really important too. So that way it has that sort of natural, like constant falling motion like a fish would, not like a just plummet to bottom, like it's smacking its face on the sand, because that doesn't look right if you ask me. But yeah, it's been funny. I would say the biggest thing I've noticed is that almost every lure that's ever been made catches fish. It's all that it matters is where you use it and how you use it. Like every lure has been made to catch fish. You just don't know necessarily where or when or why it was made to catch what kinds of fish.
Okay, I love that concept because like part of me truly believes that, and every time I buy a lure, I definitely believe that, and then I always end up with a whole pile of my tackle box. I'm like, these are the garbage ones.
Right. Yep. Yeah, I mean, I definitely have my fair share of ones where I'm like, this kid's getting into fishing over here. He needs some stuff in his tackle box. Sure, have that stuff. I'm good. Like, I know it's stuff that'll catch fish because it might even be things that I've caught fish on before.
Yeah.
But it's just not what I'm confident in anymore.
Mhm.
So if he has my box of shad wraps that I used to throw all the time for walleye, I haven't done that in a couple of years now. Like, I don't mind. Like, I know he's going to catch fish with it, but it's just not something I want to use right now. So, give somebody else a chance. Let them figure out their new confidence bait, right?
Well, and I think that's funny because I definitely go in cycles with the different stuff that I like to use. Every season comes around and I have, my new favorite, and I end up using it for a number of outings, and then all of a sudden it's season change again, and then I was like, oh man, I didn't use anything else except for that one thing. And then I start fishing again, and then it happens to me all the time. So I really think that hits home for me is I have a big tackle box and I end up only using a couple things every summer or every winter.
Right.
Hey,
yeah. I would say I did a quick 180 compared to the last 2 years. Because the last 2 years I was very much more of a fast paced, like aggressive angler in the way that I was using ripping wraps for most game fish. And so I was snap jigging them or reeling them straight in pretty fast. So both ways were super effective for me. I caught all kinds of big fish on them, but then I completely flipped the script. And then this spring I've used ripping wraps in Green Bay. And then during the walleye run too here in Oshkosh on the Fox. And they work really well. It's just like, I found that the hair jigs some days worked way better. Some days I could not get a walleye on a rip and wrap, and then as soon as I threw the hair jig on, I was getting them. So it's more of a finesse presentation. It's not that loud, rattling, shaking bait. But again, it's about kind of adapting to what's working for you on a given year. Because sure, a rip and wrap might have worked really well for me. About 2 years ago, I found a school of, I think I was on them for about 45 minutes of all low to mid 20-inch walleyes, which for this lake, that's pretty darn good over here. And it was seriously one of the best walleye outings like I've ever had in open water. And I mean, on that day, I'm sure you could have considered me filling my whole tackle box with rip and wrap 5s and chrome. But again, like I went out the next probably 3 trips and caught a couple walleyes, but not anything like that school. And again, as I said earlier, if somebody sees the point I was catching them on, I don't care. I couldn't catch them there the next 2 days. So what does it matter?
That's that's so funny. But I love hearing what you're saying, confidence baits, and you're talking about, these different trends in your fishing. But I think that that's really important because I think this is just what happens to people, right?
Yeah.
And so if you can navigate through, if you can learn these different tactics, and if you can share it, I think that's ultimately the key of honestly why we're here and talking about these things, because this is my favorite part is when you're like, oh, here's all I do, and it's like the easiest thing in the world. And That's literally how, when you're like, oh, panfish trolling, wow. And I'm like, no, it's literally the easiest thing in the world. But that's the thing, is because there are so many tactics out there. The internet, oh, this rig, you have to tie up 50 lines and things, and with this special knot and all, and it's like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be tangled up, right? And so when you can find something that's like straightforward, something that works, I mean, that's ultimately the goal, because that's how you connect with fish.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, confidence baits are a little similar to fishing memories, I would say, except confidence baits pan out more often than fishing memories does. Because I've had many times where, fishing memories, it's like I already know before I even get there that it's not the same time period as it was the last 2 years when I did well on that spot. I'm still going to check it. Don't get me wrong. Like, I'm guilty of fishing by memories too, but I can't be surprised when it didn't work out the way it did the last 2 years because the conditions are completely different. So that's something I try to stay away a little bit from. But I mean, the confidence baits, though, I have come to find out very quickly that if you're not confident in what you're using, for the most part, you're not going to catch fish. I've been in the boat with guys who we were throwing the exact same bait, and like, no, like, shade to them, no offense to them, but like I might be like really badly out fishing them with the exact same setup. And it's just because I'm so confident. Like in the rip and wraps the last 2 years, I felt like I could do no wrong with the rip and wrap. And then the guys next to me were throwing it. I'm like, no, you got to rip it like this. You got to rip it like this. But it's also practice. I had the cadence down in my head on how to do it every time. Whereas somebody who's new to it, like, they're not going to know how. That's not their fault. It's just, again, sometimes the fish want it a certain way. And if you don't have that certain way, it's just not what they want. So if you're confident what you're doing, you'll be more consistent with it. And then hopefully that'll lead to some success.
That is true, hopefully, right?
Yeah, right.
Because I laugh like that because even from lake to lake it could vary. And so let's say that you have a specific technique and you get used to it, but then you go somewhere else and it's, instead of a minnow bite, it's a bug bite, and so you have to like change up everything. Or I don't know, that's an extreme example, but it is funny how things change so much from place to place. And so when you can learn something that works in a place, that is fun though.
Right. I don't know if you guys get lake flies by you, but they're really bad here in the spring, right around Mother's Day they hatch. And it was last year I was out in the spring, and most people when they're fishing for bluegill, they just run a bobber and a jig or a night crawler below it, right? And so that's, I mean, at the shallowest, you're going to be like a foot below the surface because you don't want it right under your bobber. But I would see all these lake flies landing on the surface, and I just looked around and I would see like pie plate sized bluegill just inhaling them on the surface. And I'm seeing other guys in their boats with bobbers down, like getting frustrated because they can see the fish eating, but they don't have anything else. They just got bobbers and jigs and worms. And I'm like, if they're eating lake flies, I gotta do something similar. So I got the fly fishing rod out. That's not something I do. Like, when I trout fish, I don't even fly fish. I use crankbaits for that. But it was one of those times where I was like, well, the only thing I have in here that looks like a fly is a fly fishing fly that looks like a lake fly. But as soon as I started throwing that out, I was catching big bluegill one after another, and a couple crappie and bass too. But like, what I was after was bluegill. But again, that's another thing too, Emily. I think you were saying in the beginning, like looking around at the conditions, not just fishing the date that you were there last year, like looking around at the conditions, seeing if they're anything like what you expected them to be, and then using that to choose your approach.
Well, and that's a really funny thing to point out because we do have a few lake flies up here, and actually they just hatched this past Sunday while we were on the water. I swear to you, because in the morning we got there and I didn't see a single, I don't know, a bug flying here or there, normal things. But then by the end of the day, there were lake flies, and actually I think also stone flies, like all
that's what it was.
Well, it was both though.
Well, there was a few. There was like a small mayfly,
yeah,
small mayfly hatch. So lake flies are just like you guys have the Winnebago system is known for the bigger mayflies. That's what you're referring to as lake flies. But there's like thousands of species of mayflies, and so the one that was up by us, we do have the bigger one. It doesn't, at least as far as coverage of like people's homes and stuff, I think it's more acute like around that lake.
Yeah.
But yeah, we had a smaller species that hatch, but it was a lot of stone flies. And so that I also wondered if that was something that was maybe holding the fish up, because even if you notice a hatch is happening and you don't see any surface hitting, what happens with those bugs is they're in a larval stage and they swim, right? And so they're swimming, but because they start metamorphosing, they start to float. But because they're a swimming bug, they want to go back down, and then they float up, and then eventually they hit the top, and then they hatch out of their exoskeleton and they fly out of the water. And so a lot of times you'll have subsurface eating where those bugs are trying to come back down, and then those fish are just going around and picking those off. And that might be why you're not having a good day. That may have been why there was fish there. We just weren't matching the hatch well enough.
Match the hatch is, I think, ultimately exactly what you're saying here. Because if we would have had a fly rod, though, with a little tiny fly on there, you can't tell me we wouldn't have gotten a few more bites.
Well, we definitely would have been able to reach in a little bit more shallow.
Yeah. I think too, if you've never tried it before, for anybody watching, ice fishing, I don't know if it's because it's something also going on underwater. It shouldn't be in the winter. But what you were talking about with how insects might be swimming up and then swimming back down, my ice fishing success for panfish has skyrocketed ever since I stopped jigging my jig right in place and instead started pulling it up and away and dropping it all the way back to down to bottom, pulling it up and away and all the way back down to bottom. That's all I do now. And it works really, really well. So again, I don't know if it's like because of the hatch that the fish just react to it because they think it's a hatch regardless of the fact that there's ice on the water. They still think it's a hatch, and so they think it's that bug trying to escape or floating up and then swimming back down. But usually as I'm pulling it up and away, when I'm sight fishing especially, I'll do this, but I'll see a giant bluegill or perch come in out of nowhere as soon as I'm on the up, and it flies up from underneath and just inhales it. Like, I didn't even know that fish was there looking at me, but as soon as I did the right kind of technique, all of a sudden he's super interested.
Okay, wait, I think that this is a great point because actually I thought about this a lot. And here's my theory about this is because, to be honest, I do that jig up thing that you're talking about. But here's why is because if you think about in nature, and I am not an expert or a scientist, but like from what I know and from what I've viewed on the AquaView, right? Because I've done a lot of AquaView time down there. And so like if you think about the bugs that are down near the bottom or near structure or whatever, what bug is actually sitting and in one place, just doing this forever in one place forever? Like nothing.
Right.
And so you're like, but that's what I do in summers. I put like a bug on my bobber and then it like bobs there. Yeah, but the water moves it around. There's some variance. It's here, it's there. And that's part of what creates like that swim. And so even though you feel like your bobber's in like one spot, it's, it's moving around. And so I think that's exactly it with winter is if it were really a bug down there, if it were really a minnow down there, it would be moving, it would be swimming around. It would be a little bit more dynamic in the ecosystem. And even in winter, people are like, yeah, everything slows down. Everything is slow. Like it's not moving around, but like it's not dead stagnant either.
No.
And so I think what you're doing is creating that best of both worlds, kind of that swimming movement, but still being kind of an easy target that the fish can still, I guess, target. So I love hearing you talk about that because I think that there's truly something to that.
Yeah, similar to that, it's another thing that kind of blew people's minds this past ice season. And I don't know if I actually posted about them last season. I think I really started posting about them this season. The jigging shadow wrap glide baits. If you saw me post anything about that this past winter, I might have done it before I even met you guys at the expo, but super hot bait for walleye, northern pike, bass, like all kinds of game fish, and even some really big panfish. It's just a big, I want to say it's a 3.5-inch glide bait. That's the bigger version, at least. That's the big bait to be using ice fishing. Like me personally, all I'd ever seen people do for walleye through the ice was like little tiny gold spoons. And I swear that was what everyone told me I needed to use. And I think before discovering this bait, I had maybe caught like 3 walleyes through the ice and none of them were bigger than 15 inches long. Then all of a sudden I discover this bait and I'm like, that looks a lot like a perch. They've got a nice perch color scheme. I was like, I want to catch one really big fish today. So I'm just going to tie this on. So I did. And like, it didn't even take long. We were on a school of fish, but nobody was really catching many. It was all walleye. All of a sudden, like almost every drop down, I'm catching a walleye. And they weren't all monster. Like there were a lot of like 16 to 18s in there, which are good fish, but they're not monster. But then all of a sudden you get a random 20, 22 in there, 24. Like, I'm like, this is the best of both worlds right here. And I'm not even I thought I was using an obscenely large bait for ice fishing compared to the little spoons I was using before. But it turns out like that's what the fish are feeding on. They were out there feeding, number one, on little perch. Number two, we've got sheephead, that there's baby sheephead swimming around Lake Poygan through the winter that are like about 3-4 inches long. And the bottom of this bait is actually white. So it looks exactly like a sheephead when it's swimming up over their head. So if they see that thing jigging around, dancing around their head, like if they think it's legit, they're gonna eat it. And I will say more times than not, they think it's legit. So that's just a little thing to try out this ice season if you got any good game fish lakes you want to hit, because it's worked everywhere I've tried it for walleye, pike, and panfish, or big panfish, and then also bass.
Mm. Well, and I like hearing, that your idea started with, mimicking that perch, but then you realize that it looks like other things in the ecosystem. And, I love hearing you talk about also the rough fish, because sometimes people are like, oh, they discount them, but that is a fish that is in that ecosystem. I know you're both shaking your heads. I love that. Well, because people should not be doing that, right? And you're mentioning like there's a bunch of little tiny ones swimming around in there. And it's like, truthfully, I think people forget that, right? They're so easy to discount like the drum and whatever, get them out of here, like blah. But truly that makes up part of the ecosystem, and all those little ones. There's a lot of bait out there.
So I've been doing some work with the DNR here the last couple of years, doing fish shocking, fish netting, doing all sorts of surveys where we count the number of fish of each species, the size of fish we bring in. But what I've learned from that more than anything is the bait that's in the system. So I used that to my advantage the last 2 years, actually more so this year with the hair jigs I was using. The hair jigs I've used this year are all very short in profile. They're not those really long ones that you see some people using, because the bait fish, they're mostly trout perch here, which are like, most of them I would say are like 2 to 4 inches long. You might get an anomaly here and there, but most of them are like 2 to 4 inches long. So are the hair jigs. And as soon as I started using them this spring, I started using them a little bit last summer, but when I really did well was starting this spring, when I was using them on shallow rocks where the fish were stacked up. Number one, I was catching trout perch on the hair jigs, like just snagged like on the main hook and on the stinger hook. But still, like I was around that many trout perch, and I took a lot of pictures of my bait right next to the trout perch, just like showing people this is how close the match is. Like it's exactly the same size. It's a pretty dang similar color. Like it was a black, red, and white jig, so close enough. And I'll use solid black ones too, because fish most of the time I feel like are just looking for the silhouette that looks like something they'll eat. And then one of the walleyes I caught, I want to say it was probably like a, I don't know, 18-inch walleye, I would say 16, 18, somewhere in there. Point is, it was super fat. And so the main reason I kept it is because I wanted to see what they were eating, because that's another thing you can use to your advantage, at least in my experience. You would not believe there were 18 trout perch in this fish. And so that is including all the ones that were in its gut. I didn't even tear apart, all the organs to figure out exactly what was there. I got through the stomach. There were 18 between the stomach, still in the gullet. Like there were 3 tails sticking out of its throat. There were 4 in the net, like that it spit out as it like was eating my jig, and I was bringing it back to the boat. As I stuck the net down, it spit out 4 into the net. So like you got to think that fish was down there just gorging on those minnows, and then I cast my hair jig out, and it luckily decides to eat mine. But like 18 trout perch, probably more. Like the ones I probably couldn't grab, probably guess 20. So like 20 trout perch in one walleye. Like clearly they're eating the trout perch, so I had no reason to switch from the hair jig, and I think that's part of why it worked so well this season for me. And so I've just pretty much stuck with the hair jigs, I would say, most of the season, at least for walleye.
So one of the things that you mentioned earlier on is that the trout perch are not super long, and so maybe you watch your hair jig. Does that mean that you're trimming down your hair jig?
No, I just use ones that are really small, like shorter hair jigs. So the 2 I've been using the most are the VMC bucktail jig and the Kalen's bucktail jig. Both of those are great hair jigs. They're both, I wish I had one on me right now. They're both short jigs. If you go to like a VMC moon jig, that thing is like double the length. Like I'm not saying you're not going to catch fish on it, because you absolutely will, and I've seen it done. It's just in my experience, it's worked better to try and match the hatch and do something they're already feeding on, like a smaller minnow like that. I've caught way more fish doing that than when I've upsized and gone to way bigger jigs.
Well, and so with that, I think that's something that I hear all the time too, is like, Oh, well, if I'm just a little bit bigger or a little bit better, is it actually better to try to beat out the match the hatch, or do you actually just want to match the hatch?
I think that all of it is an effort to match the hatch because even the big swim baits you throw, like, I mean, I've got some big baits that I've caught some really big fish. Like, I've got a couple golden shiner looking ones, and we have lots of golden shiners here. There will be schools of golden shiner, sure, but there's areas too where you'll just see a golden shiner or two swimming around and you'll catch them. Like, I don't think it's necessarily you're having to match the hatch in terms of match a whole school that literally just hatched. It's more so just matching something that lives in the system that could be the right size or the right color that the fish are going to believe it. I mean, at the end of the day, it's trying to fool the fish. So if I'm throwing a golden shiner bait here where there's thousands of golden shiners, like a fish isn't really going to think too hard about it if they see that. Whereas let's say I'm throwing it where there are no large bait fish. I mean, I'm not saying they're not going to eat it because instinctively they might, biologically they might feel a need to, but it's just I personally have done better when I'm trying to do something that matches something that's in the system already. And that's all across the state. I've done it even in some other states too.
Yeah. And ice season, open water, it doesn't matter. That's the way to
Yep.
go. Okay, cool. So, do you feel like you are already moving into the summer pattern, or are you going to have to switch up your tactics a lot as the water continues to warm up?
I would say I'm like borderline. I hate to answer it like that, but like
No, I think we all
again,
know
the
what you're doing.
weeds, yeah, like the weeds are just starting to grow up in like mid depth. There are no weeds really in the deep water yet, and you don't start to see the panfish slide off deeper until the deep weeds grow up. So like
Mhm.
one of my favorite panfish bites is July, August, even September. Like the panfish really are out deep, and you can just run deep slip bobbers. You can do jigging wraps; those are one of my favorites. You can do jigging spoons, like small stuff like that, but kind of a I guess bigger profile, like a minnow, things like that. That those panfish that are deeper, you can get down to them quickly, and so that's something that I really like doing in the midsummer, late summer. But I'm not doing that yet. Like there are still way more panfish up shallow, way more panfish in mid depth. Like I've still been seeing bluegill on beds lately, so it's too early. It is way too early. I will not be bumping off deep like to the summer pattern as you called it till like July, and it all depends on the year. Like last year, I would say I was in this sort of summer pattern by early June, maybe even late May, because it was such a warm winter the year before. Hardly any of the weeds died off. Whereas this year, almost all the weeds died. So there's still areas where last year it was like I was hammering fish in the weeds there, but now this year, like there's no weeds because they just haven't grown yet. They all died off over the winter, so now it's just plain rock and there's not as many fish there. So as we talked about before, it's all about like look at your surround. Even if you don't have sonar like me, like just look at your surroundings. If it's clear water, you can see the weeds. Even if you're just pulling in weeds in your jig, or if you're not pulling in weeds, you know that they're not there.
Well, and this is a time where I'm going to point out a few things that have happened during our show. So, if you guys have been listening, Matt has been talking a lot about, he's been using black profiles and his weeds aren't growing up, but the water temperatures in that upper 60s to low 70s. That doesn't mean that there's going to be weeds because Matt is fishing Lake Winnebago. And so Lake Winnebago has a tendency to be fairly stained, like it's a pretty algal filled lake. And so those weeds get
He's like, no way.
I have thoughts, but continue.
no, but so those weeds don't get as much sunlight as up by us. So I'll just point out, like, we'll go fish pelican once in a while. We have weeds out to 10 feet right now that are up to 2 feet of the surface, and our water temps haven't really hit mid 60s very much. And so when you're thinking about where you're fishing in the state, keep in mind that each lake is going to be a little bit different, and utilize some of this information to set yourself up for success, right? So like our summer bite might just be right now purely dependent on water temperature. The structures there, they're just waiting. For you might take a little bit longer because your water's a little bit, maybe a little bit darker, like not darker as in like coffee color, but just there's
Yeah.
not as much sun penetration, so your weeds might take longer to grow up in some areas than it would for us. So just take some of that information into account when you're going out fishing.
Yeah, only thing I was gonna say on the Lake Winnebago dirty water part is just that it all depends on the year. And the reason for that is it depends on the wind we get. So and it depends on where on the lake you are. Because if you get, I usually fish the west side of the lake. That's where the most natural structure is, like points, reefs, things like that. There's like hardly any other than man-made reefs on the east side of the lake and shorelines. So I usually fish the west side. That's also where I live closer to. What I'm saying is that this spring we've had a ton of east wind. So this west side has been getting pummeled by waves. Now those trout perch I talked about earlier, those get blown around. We had so many trout perch up after all that heavy east wind. As soon as it flipped to a west wind, I really was not catching many trout perch anymore. So like they probably weren't around if I wasn't bumping into them once in a while. There probably weren't as many at least. But on the dirty water side of things, that blows all that turbulent water and mixes everything up on the west side when you get that east wind. This spring, it's been awful. We seriously have had like one of the windiest springs I've seen in my life. It's been crazy east wind all the time. I've been out there in big waves a lot. I've been trying to hide around like points and in bays and things like that just to escape the wind and waves. But then I look back to, I think it was 2021 or 2022 in the spring. No joke, the entire spring until like June. So basically, again, summer, like all the way till June, I was sight fishing in like 12, 14 feet of water and catching smallmouth that I could just see swimming around, and all other kinds of fish too, like walleye, giant sheephead, freshwater drum. Like I could see those two swimming around. And again, that was all pretty much Ned rigs is pretty much all I used that spring because the smallmouth loved it. And that's what I loved catching at that time primarily. So again,
Everybody
that
loves
year,
catching.
crystal clear for like the whole spring. I didn't hear that. What was that?
Everybody loves catching smallmouth.
Right. Yep. Yeah. So that's just one example of a spring where it was like, you could see straight down for the longest time. And that definitely changes the fishing. Whereas this spring, like there was maybe a week where I could see that far down, like early on before we even got that kind of crazy wind. As soon as it kicked in, gone. See ya. And we do get algae blooms pretty bad, but honestly, like seems like a lot of the bodies of water in Wisconsin have been getting hit hard by those, even those smaller ones. But yeah, the algae is the same deal with the wind though. Like if you get a strong east wind, the west side is gonna be green as can be. And it's disgusting at times. It doesn't really get horrible, I would say, till like August usually is probably the worst, and then that stuff will survive. Again, it depends on the fall and how cold it gets. It'll usually survive through like September a little bit, maybe into October. But yeah, it definitely can get dirty over here. I just thought I should mention for anybody fishing over here, it is all about the wind because some years, like I said, crystal clear, you think you're on the Great Lakes. Then this year, like this is Lake Winnebago. Like you remember what lake you're on.
Well, and ultimately, I think one of the morals of the story here is like fish the conditions that you have, right?
Yes.
And so you're talking about, assessing whatever that is, the wind, the perch, the minnows, everything, big lake, little lake. And ultimately, that's what you have to do every time that you go out. And so one thing that Josh is really good at is checking things like wind direction and stuff before we go out, because I'm famous for the lake I would have chosen was going to be the windiest lake in the world. So at least deal yourself a good hand of cards and then play what you're dealt and hopefully make it a good day. But I think one of the other things that we've talked a lot about in this episode is the flexibility. So whether that is, looking shallow, looking deep, switching up your tactic, whatever, there's a lot to all of that. But the nice thing is that you can watch all of your favorite online personalities up and learn about that. So I'm doing quite a bit of that tonight. But I have to say, you've got a lot going on. So first of all, remind us where people can follow you and continue to learn from you.
Yeah, so I'm on Facebook. That's, I would say, the platform I've been growing most quickly on this past couple of years because I only got on there about 2 years ago. But my informational, like very detailed approach of what I'm doing, where I'm fishing, all that kind of helpful information, that kind of approach has really been new, I think, to a lot of faces on Facebook. So if you just type in Matthew Crawford fishing or even just Matthew fishing, I'm pretty sure I pop up almost right away. Same story on Instagram and YouTube. I try to keep it pretty simple that way. But yeah, I think the approach I'm doing, despite, some negativity, again, it is very minimal. I'm definitely going to keep doing it that way because I feel like if I'm not giving someone some kind of advice on how to catch the fish, there's not really a point to me putting a post out there. I don't need people to see that I just, caught a pile of fish. Like, so what? That doesn't help anybody. And I do see quite a few posts like that where it's just somebody posting a pile pic because They think they're just cool for that, or they think they're really good at fishing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's a lot more helpful if I can put something out there that'll potentially help someone else put a pattern together, whether it's on the same lake or a different one, it doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then do you have like fun events or anything coming up that you're going to be at if people want to bump into you other than on accident on the lake?
Right? Yeah. I will be at the Wisconsin Ice Fishing Expo in Oshkosh this December, and then I'll be at the Wisconsin Fishing Expo in February in Madison. So I'll be at both of those events. So it's a little ways out, but I'm really excited for the ice fishing one in Oshkosh because that's home to me. And I'm going to get to do 2 seminars. One will be about big baits for big game fish, which is actually a little bit about what we talked about already, partly those jig and shadow rafts, but a few other things too. And then also about sight fishing for panfish, which I hinted at a little bit earlier. But I mean, as long as you're on a relatively clear lake, you can do it. Those northern, really dark water lakes, those are almost impossible to sight fish on. But for, I would say, most of the middle to southern part of Minnesota, Wisconsin, any in the Midwest here, and then even over in Iowa, I know it's super popular in some of the big bluegill lakes there. Sight fishing is really effective for them because you can it's a lot different than seeing them on your sonar screen, but I'll talk about that in the seminar. But anyway, yeah, those 2 places, I'll be at those expos. So
You piqued my interest. I will be there.
Yeah.
good.
The other thing I'm really looking forward to is we're going to have you out. Hopefully it works for this summer. Based on just a few things that you said about panfish moving into summer patterns. I think that we fish the same fish, but differently. So I'm excited to, chat a little bit about that. And I know that we'll be bringing that to some of the people because how could we not? Yeah. What?
Oh, I was just I just remembered. I just wanted to let everybody know that again this weekend, you and I will be at Park Falls at the St. Croix Rods customer appreciation event. We'll be at the Euro Tackle booth. So if you guys are up that way, give us a shout. We'll sit and talk about some fishing.
Nice.
Cool. Otherwise, Matthew, thank you so much for being here this evening and talking about all this. It's been really a lot of fun.
Sure. It's been fun. Yeah. Thanks for letting me talk about fishing. It's what I love doing.
Yeah. And to the people at home, thank you guys for being here as well. That is always a big part of the fun. And looking forward to seeing everyone on next week's edition of The Night Bite.
Night, everybody.